The Flying Milk Bottle, The Rise of the P-47 Thunderbolt, April 8, 1943. At 27,000 feet above Caen, France, the oxygen mask couldn't hide Oberleutnant Rolf Hermichen's smirk. He watched the ungainly silhouettes climbing laboriously toward his formation through the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf FW-190A5. The 26-year-old veteran ace of Jagdgeschwader 26 studied the American fighters making their combat debut over occupied Europe. "The Yanks have sent us flying milk bottles," he transmitted to his wingman, unable to suppress his laughter at the sight of the massive Republic P-47 Thunderbolts struggling for altitude. Below them, 16 P-47 Sea Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group lumbered upward in tight formation, their 2,000 horsepower Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engines straining against their 7-ton weight. To German pilots accustomed to the sleek Spitfires and nimble Soviet fighters, these corpulent American machines appeared almost comical. They had barrel-shaped fuselages topped with greenhouse canopies, wings that seemed too small for their massive bodies, and propellers that dwarfed anything in the Luftwaffe inventory. What Hermichen didn't know, what none of the German pilots circling like wolves above could have imagined, was that they were witnessing the arrival of the weapon that would systematically destroy the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. Within 18 months, these flying milk bottles would transform from objects of derision into instruments of terror, their 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns becoming the most feared sound in German skies. The mathematics of destruction were already loaded in those broad wings. 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire of 6,000 rounds per minute, enough concentrated firepower to saw a Messerschmitt in half in less than 2 seconds. The transformation began that April morning when Major Donald Blakesley, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German formation positioning for attack. The former Eagle Squadron veteran, who had transferred from RAF Spitfires just weeks earlier, understood what his men didn't yet know. Survival in the P-47 required abandoning everything they thought they knew about air combat. The Thunderbolt represented a radical departure from conventional fighter design philosophy. While the Germans had pursued lightweight interceptors, optimized for climb and turn performance, Republic Aviation had created something unprecedented. A high-altitude juggernaut that used mass, power, and firepower to redefine the rules of aerial warfare. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had emerged from a June 1940 panic. As German fighters swept across France, Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, received urgent specifications from the U.S. Army Air Forces. They wanted a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching the Luftwaffe's best. What Kartveli designed instead was a monster that redefined the possible. The XP-47B prototype that first flew on May 6, 1941, shocked everyone who saw it. At 9,900 pounds empty, it weighed 65% more than its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. The massive turbo-supercharger system, with its complex ducting running through the rear fuselage, gave it an almost pregnant appearance. Not only did it fly, it flew like nothing else at altitude. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial producing 2,000 horsepower, could maintain full power at 27,000 feet, where German fighters gasped for air. The turbo-supercharger, fed by exhaust gases, delivered sea-level performance in the stratosphere where the air was too thin for conventional superchargers. Major Hubert Hub Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group training at Bridgeport, Connecticut, initially despised the aircraft. His unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents between September 1942 and January 1943. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than Germans would in the first months of combat. It ground-looped on landing, torque-rolled on takeoff, and dove with such enthusiasm that pilots discovered compressibility, their controls freezing as shock waves formed on the wings. But those who mastered it discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who would become one of America's top aces with 27 victories, described his first flight. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. The first combat encounters in April and May 1943 confirmed every German prejudice. The P-47s couldn't turn with the FW-190s, couldn't climb with the Messerschmitt Bf-109s, and couldn't match their nimble handling at medium altitudes. Luftwaffe pilots quickly developed tactics to exploit these weaknesses. Hauptmann Josef Pips Priller, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, reported to headquarters after his first encounter. The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. Flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. The statistics seemed to confirm German confidence. In their first month of operations, the American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. But something strange was happening in those early encounters that German intelligence failed to notice. The P-47s that were shot down had absorbed incredible punishment before falling. One aircraft returned from a May 4th mission with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant systems, shrugged off hits that would have stopped a liquid-cooled fighter cold. More significantly, when P-47s did get their guns on target, the results were catastrophic. The Thunderbolt's weapons battery created a convergence zone of destruction that German pilots had never experienced. Unlike the rifle-caliber weapons of early war fighters, or the cannon with limited ammunition, the American fighter could maintain sustained fire for over 30 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. The event that began changing German perceptions occurred on June 26, 1943, over Lille, France. It involved 2nd Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron. Johnson's Thunderbolt was caught in the crossfire of multiple attackers, taking catastrophic damage in the first seconds of combat. 21 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The P-47 continued flying with damage that would have reduced any other fighter to falling debris. Then, a lone Focke-Wulf 190 discovered the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the channel at less than 170 miles per hour. The German pilot emptied his cannon and machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still, it flew. He pulled alongside again, shook his head in apparent amazement, gave an informal salute, and peeled away, presumably out of ammunition. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had underestimated their own creation. German intelligence, receiving combat reports from the 2nd Gruppe Jagdgeschwader 26, initially refused to believe it. By July 1943, American pilots were learning to exploit the P-47's true strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke had discovered the secret through brutal trial and error. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, initially seen as a disadvantage, became a weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could achieve, even in a vertical dive. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin, who would become one of the first American aces in Europe, developed what became known as the boom and zoom tactic. P-47 formations would climb to 30,000 feet, higher than German fighters could effectively operate. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts would dive, reaching speeds that made deflection shooting impossible for defending Germans. The true revelation of American firepower came during the August 17, 1943, dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt Bf-110 Zerstörer destroyer aircraft. Unteroffizier Heinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the Bf-110-9s who survived, later recounted in a prisoner of war interrogation, "The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down, destroyed." At a convergence distance, typically set at 300 yards, all 8 guns' ballistic paths intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything in that zone faced 100.50 caliber projectiles per second. each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The combined firepower created an impenetrable zone of destruction. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was discovering another horrifying reality. The P-47's performance improved dramatically with altitude, while German fighters suffered. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with 206 victories, encountered this reality fatally on October 8, 1943. Leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190A6 sluggish and unresponsive in the thin air. Robert Johnson, flying at 31,000 feet, spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf. Johnson's combat report noted, opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philipp's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. In January 1944, a new variant of the P-47 began arriving in England that would complete the transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47 D-25, not D-22, featured a Hamilton Standard hydromatic propeller with paddle blades 13 feet in diameter. The improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. The paddle blade propeller also changed the sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive thundering roar, created by the blade tips reaching supersonic speeds, could be heard for miles. German ground troops began calling it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. As more P-51 Mustangs arrived for long-range escort in spring 1944, P-47 units increasingly focused on ground attack, a role that would make them the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles, while later variants carried two 1,000-pound bombs, a 500-pound fuselage bomb, and 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVARs. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The hammer of those heavy machine guns, a column of our trucks, simply ceased to exist. German troops called them Jabos, a contraction of Jagdbomber or fighter bomber. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, over 500 P-47s provided air cover, creating an impenetrable umbrella. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives and thousands of vehicles destroyed. The P-47's ultimate vindication came in its encounters with German jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me 262, with its 540 miles per hour top speed, should have been untouchable. But P-47 pilots discovered they could catch jets during takeoff and landing when the jets were most vulnerable, or in high-speed dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to shoot down a Me 262 with a P-47. The ultimate demonstration of American industrial might came during Operation Bodenplatte, not Bodenplatter, the Luftwaffe's desperate attempt to destroy Allied air power on January 1, 1945. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground. When a captured German pilot taunted, "What do you think of that?" Major George Brooking's response became legendary. "By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The numbers told the story of inevitable defeat. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. The Farmingdale factory completed one Thunderbolt every hour around the clock. In March 1945, Oberstleutnant Joseph Priller, the same pilot who had mocked the P-47s 2 years earlier, was interviewed by German propaganda officials. His statement, deemed too demoralizing for publication, summarized the war's end. "The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built." Its firepower is unprecedented. But beyond the machine is what it represents. Unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20. We lose 1, it's gone forever. We laughed at them in 1943. We're not laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling. The sound haunts us. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable. The final victory, as viewed by German pilots, was clear. Like everything American, it's about overwhelming material superiority. They didn't beat us through better tactics or braver pilots. They buried us under an avalanche of steel and lead. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft, experienced pilots were dead or captured, and airfields were cratered ruins. But even with aircraft and fuel, German pilots faced an impossible equation. Attacking meant facing P-47 formations that owned every altitude from ground level to 40,000 feet. Feldwebel Klaus Brettschneider, one of the last German pilots trained in 1945, flew exactly one combat mission before the war ended. His encounter with P-47s over Leipzig lasted 12 seconds. I saw them diving from above, 4 Thunderbolts in perfect formation. I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from 500 meters. My aircraft shook like it was hit by sledgehammers. I barely escaped. In the parachute, I watched them destroy my entire Staffel squadron. 6 fighters gone in under a minute. The sky rained burning aluminum and bodies. The psychological impact was complete. German pilots developed what medical officers called Jabo fever, fighter-bomber fever, characterized by physical symptoms of stress appearing when Thunderbolts were reported in the area. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear became physically ill before missions against P-47s. The final statistics of P-47 operations defied comprehension. In Europe, the Thunderbolt was credited with destroying 3,752 German aircraft in aerial combat and another 3,315 aircraft on the ground. On the surface, the destruction was absolute. P-47s were responsible for taking out 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railway cars, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. In the Pacific, the P-47 claimed 697 Japanese aircraft destroyed in aerial combat and 150 on the ground, along with 150 locomotives and over 1,500 vehicles. The 9th Air Force alone, primarily equipped with P-47s, flew 213,873 combat sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, and fired 135 million rounds of ammunition. The Thunderbolt units achieved a formidable 4.6 to 1 kill ratio in aerial combat, while suffering the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter-bomber. The human cost was staggering. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 28,000 pilots killed in combat against Western Allied forces. By war's end, the average German fighter pilot had less than 30 hours of combat experience. The average P-47 pilot had over 200. Records from the Luftwaffe Interrogation Center at Oberursel revealed the complete reversal of intelligence assessment. In April 1943, the P-47 was dismissed as a large, unmaneuverable fighter, posing a minimal threat. By December 1943, German intelligence noted exceptional high-altitude performance and extreme structural strength, raising the assessment to a significant threat above 25,000 feet. By June 1944, the aircraft was deemed the dominant fighter-bomber, superior to all German types above 20,000 feet, and was classified as a critical threat at all altitudes. Finally, in March 1945, the P-47 was labeled the best fighter-bomber of the war, with its combination of firepower, durability, and performance unmatched. The final German assessment was unsurvivable in direct engagement. At a 1985 reunion, General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, captured the transformation. We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big, heavy fighter and laughed. The Americans didn't try to build a European fighter. They built an American one designed around production, firepower, and survivability. The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. It was a pilot's aircraft wrapped in armor. That's when I knew we never had a chance. Those guns, we called them Roosevelt's piano because of the sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. The P-47's design was the perfect representation of American industrial philosophy. Brute force engineering backed by unlimited resources. The wing spars, for instance, were over-engineered to support 40,000 pounds, 3 times the aircraft's loaded weight. The complex ammunition feed system, 8 separate boxes with electric boost motors and heated guns, was engineered for reliable feeding during high-G maneuvers. Though some German veterans maintained that the P-47 won through quantity over quality, combat records tell a different story. The 50-caliber heavy machine gun armament, dismissed as inferior to cannon, proved devastatingly effective. The P-47's weapons created a probability cloud of bullets that guaranteed hits even with imperfect aim. A 2-second burst put at least 20 armor-piercing incendiary rounds into a fighter-sized target, ensuring catastrophic destruction. The P-47 Thunderbolt remains the heaviest single-engine piston fighter ever mass-produced. It was built by the thousands, flown by highly trained pilots, and maintained by mechanics whose training time was measured in weeks. The transformation of German opinion from mockery to terror took less than 2 years. The P-47 entered combat as an object of derision and ended the war as an instrument of annihilation. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America.